right. There's our stream. Good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvisha vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Very good. So nice to see you all. And yeah, okay. Welcome also to the all of anyone who is watching this online. We continue our weekly satsang. We have lots of questions. We missed last week's session, so I think we have more questions to answer. And we'll, as always, alternate between our questions from our local audience and from online questions. A lot of good online questions again, as always. This question, first question comes from Arjuna in Bangalore. He asks, how should a sadhaka, a spiritual aspirant, conduct himself in a social gathering? There's a tendency on such occasions to gossip and indulge in unwanted verbal communication. Such interactions are not exactly spiritual uplifting. Absolutely. Okay. What's interesting about the question, Arun's question, is how should a sadhaka behave in such situations? That word should suggests a very conventional outlook on behavior. And that is, our behavior should conform to some standard. And you'll be I have to share. Actually, this would be nice to share. There's a wonderful American joke about this, and some of you watching online may enjoy this. I think our local audience knows it quite well. Somebody who is always concerned about how people behave. You should do this, you should do that, you should do that. And there's a lot of shoulds in the world on how we should behave. And some people get fed up with that should, and they say, don't should on me. That's the American joke. You can figure it out, right? All right. But it points to an underlying principle that my guru focused on a lot, and that is our behavior should not be outer directed. Isn't that what should is about? I should conform to the expectations of others. He said instead, your behavior should be based on you, and in particular, based on your values. So, two ways of looking at behavior. One is good behavior is determined by should, outside influences, but according to my guru, it's far, far better. There's nothing wrong with that, except it's not conducive to spiritual maturity. What is conducive to spiritual maturity is to internalize the values. And let me explain. We behave according to our values. If you have a value for going to parties and getting drunk, that's what you do. If you don't have a value for that, you don't do it. No one needs to tell you you shouldn't do it. You should have a value for that. What did I just say? Sure. You should have. So I caught myself. making the same. That's how deeply embedded this problem is in our thinking. And just to follow up on a little further on Arun's question. So with regard to social gatherings, how should, in quotation marks, you behave? You behave according to your values. You know, if you have a value for gossip, what do? You gossip. When I was young, I would be the weird fellow sitting in the corner. That was just me. Somehow these social gatherings didn't work for me. Maybe that's why I ended up like this. But you act according to your values. So instead of approaching this issue, how should we behave in certain social situations, better to look at our values. Eventually your values will shift to such an extent where no longer gossip is no longer something you want to do, therefore you don't do it. And further, eventually, you may stop going to social gatherings altogether, as I did, because you don't have a value for it anymore. By the way, I think you get the point. If you're interested in this particular topic about shifting from a should-based system of behavior to a values-based system is wrong. If your behavior is driven by shoulds, and you want it to be more driven internally by your values, please read my guru's book, Value of Values. It's an amazing work. You will love it. Value of Values by Swami Tadatmananda. All right, next question from Krishna, who's in Boston. He is referring to the nididhyasana session, the Vedantic, the advanced meditation session we had last week, in which we practiced the nididhyasana, Vedantic contemplation, with regard to dealing with difficult emotional situations. And I'm going to paraphrase Krishna's question here. It says, what about using nididhyasana, not just for difficult situations, but for horrible situations? It says, suppose somebody in Gaza is with death and calamity. Suppose I were to live in Gaza with death and calamity all around me, my family killed and starving with no end in sight. How does one apply equanimity powered by practice of nididhyasana under such conditions? Okay, so there are two comments to make here. Nididhyasana is sadhana, it's a practice, a spiritual practice, and we need a conducive lifestyle for spiritual practice. And sadly, people not just in Gaza, but in so many other situations, have been deprived of the opportunity. Not just the opportunity for spiritual practice, opportunity to live without fear of dying when the next bomb hits, opportunity to live with food and water. People are deprived of that. So horrible situation. So the practice, any spiritual practice, depends on a suitable lifestyle. But then he goes on further. Krishna asks, how does one apply equanimity powered by practice of nididhyasana? How can you, if there's death and suffering all around you, you want to have equanimity and say, it's okay? Death, if you are in a horrible situation, we can't blind ourselves to the horrors of the world. There's another question in the same line. Let me kind of put both of those questions together here. We'll see it a little bit later. There's a tendency for practitioners, not just of Advaita Vedanta, but spiritual practitioners in general. There's a tendency to apply lofty spiritual principles unfairly to horrible situations in life, like the war taking place in Gaza. So if you say, for example, in Gaza, different religions will do it differently. Different traditions will do it differently. A Christian might say, that's God's will. Or a Muslim might say, that's God's will. Or someone might say, you are being tested so that you undergo more spiritual growth. Or you might say, Vedantin might say, this is all Ishvara's order. In fact, I say that. But here's the problem. If we say such things in a way that what is our intent? If our intent is to minimize the problem somehow, and that's what I want to address right now. I think Krishna kind of hints at it, and this other question that we'll see later deals with it exactly, and that is, it is an abuse of spiritual and religious teachings to use those teachings to minimize the severity of someone else's suffering. If you're suffering, you were meant to suffer. Or how about this New Age teaching? You're suffering? Why are you doing that to yourself? How's that? They say that. To me, that is an abuse. It's abusive behavior. It's hurtful, certainly not helpful. I'm trying to think of the right term. I don't know if it's been used. I'll just make something up. You know the term whitewashing, right? So now they use whitewashing means to paint over something, to cover it up, to make it less objectionable, as it was whitewashing as a metaphor, to make something less objectionable. Now there's, I think, a new term, greenwashing. Greenwashing is, you don't know this term. So greenwashing is to take something ecologically harmful and make it look like it's not so bad. Like, I think hydrogen-fueled vehicles are example, because they say hydrogen is less, it doesn't add to the carbon footprint. Nonsense. To make the hydrogen, you use far more carbon. You create far more carbon. So anyway, it is an attempt to cover up a problem, but to do so, whitewashing means it's not a valid way of covering over the problem. You're not dealing with the problem. Well, I think there's a problem in spirituality and religious groups where there's some kind of religious washing or some kind of Vedanta washing. The term used in the other email, I don't know if I can find it. Let me see if I can find it here. I probably can't. Sorry. Yeah, I'm not able to find it. So the other question is how to apply Vedanta to these horrible situations. Suppose someone were to ask, Swamiji, how to apply the teachings of Advaita Vedanta to the problems going on in Gaza? Advaita Vedanta is a spiritual practice for you. It's not a spiritual practice for solving anyone else's problems or problems anywhere else. These teachings can make you a better person so that you won't become part of a problem, and so that you can become part of a solution. The solution to the problem in Gaza is not Vedanta. Let us not think in terms of applying, and it's a mistake if we try to see the horrors going on in a place like Gaza through the lens of Vedanta, after all, it's all mithya. There's another example of whitewashing. Or when someone, the common saying in certain circles in India, ye sab maya hai. All of this is just illusion. It means, what is the intent? The intent is, why take it seriously? People are dying. Ye sab maya hai. Why take it seriously? This is an abuse of Vedantic teachings. Okay, enough said. Next, Dhyana Dasa, doesn't say where he lives, asks, in the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says, this is following the, in chapter 11, after the Sri Krishna reveals his cosmic form, that Vishwarupa, then after, I think after Sri Krishna returns to his normal form, he then says to Arjuna at some point, "O Arjuna, I have shown you what no one has seen before." Right? This is I didn't look up the verse. Actually, Dhyana Dasa did. He says it is verse 47. You can look it up. So Arjuna, Krishna says, no one has seen this before. And Dhyana Dasa asks, could you explain a little bit about this? Was he the first to see it, then other people can see it? Or is it more in the sense that each person is different and sees it differently? Well, first of all, Arjuna was not the first person to see it. In fact, I counted once. In the Mahabharata, Sri Krishna does it as Vishwarupa. He reveals his cosmic form 4 or 5 times in the Mahabharata. Once to Duryodhana and those gathered in the palace prior to the war. So Duryodhana and others saw it prior to the Vishwarupa Arjuna received in the battlefield. So then, Arjuna saw on the battlefield. Thank you. So why would he say then that, "O Arjuna, you are the first person to see it"? And here you need to be a little bit more skillful in scriptural interpretation, and that is, this is poetry, right? The whole of the Mahabharata is poetry. Poetry uses poetic devices. One of the common poetic devices used in literature around the world is called hyperbole. Hyperbole means intentional exaggeration. In Sanskrit, they call it stuti, praise, which doesn't make a point. It's just praise. So when Sri Krishna says no one has ever seen it before, he's just making it more dramatic. You can't take it literally. And of course, that's a big problem with people with regard to scripture. And not just with regard to Bhagavad Gita, but with regard to all scriptures. There are so many people who are determined to take everything literally. Poetry is literal. I think I have never seen a poem as lovely as a tree. Poems are like trees? What in the world does that mean? Poems aren't like trees. If I start complaining like that, you'll say, Swamiji, you're not supposed to take it literally. You get the point. All right. Then, from Ram, Guru Murti, Shanti, Guru Murti. Shanti lives in San Diego. An aunt of mine, while she is sitting and praying, she sometimes sees a shining light. And when she asks questions, she receives spiritual guidance. Guidance which she believes comes from God. As a consequence, it leads her to be fiercely independent, even ruffling a few feathers. Good for her. Because she believes that God is protecting her. She believes that God has no rebirth. What is happening in here? What is happening here? I have no idea. And if you ask your aunt, you're going to get her version of what's happening here. No one knows what's happening. Shanti's aunt believes that God is speaking to her. I believe that it's impossible. Who is right? Who knows? There's no way of, it's a belief. You can't prove a belief to be right or wrong. Shanti's aunt believes that God talks to her. I believe it's absolutely impossible. I can't say I'm right and she's wrong. She can't say she's right and I'm wrong. However, there is lots of psychological evidence to suggest that such things are not real, hearing God's voice. There's lots of spiritual reasons to suggest that God doesn't talk. So this doesn't prove anything. But I'm saying a preponderance of evidence, psychological evidence and spiritual evidence, suggests that maybe it's not really happening. Not a proof, but it's just preponderance of evidence. How's that? I sound like a judge in a courtroom. Next question from Sheila, who lives in Bangalore. I am able to remember God and feel gratitude. But when my mind is disturbed and anxious, I'm not able to remember God and say my prayers. Usually they say the opposite is true. People remember when they're in sorrow and not in joy. How to remember God in both situations. You know, this is a struggle every spiritual practitioner has, and that is how to control the mind so that the mind is always with God. And how to control the mind, it's simply impossible. We cannot make the mind perfectly controlled. Absolutely, we should control the mind to the best of our ability. To the best of our ability, we should continue with our prayers. We should continue with whatever spiritual practices we are doing, no matter how bad things get. We should do our best to continue these healthy habits and to continue directing the mind the best we can. But to have the expectation that our minds should always be pleasant, it's an unreasonable expectation. Minds are inherently flawed, just as our bodies are inherently flawed. How are our bodies inherently flawed? We're born with genes and molecules that ensure that we will die at some point. Our bodies are designed to self-destruct. How's that? So if our bodies have such defects, then why should we expect anything different from our minds? Knowing that our bodies will self-destruct, we do our best to forestall it. Knowing that our minds are imperfect, we do our best. And that's all we can do is do our best. Of course, doing our best means you do your best today, you try to do a little better tomorrow. That's how spiritual growth takes place. Not complacency. When I say do your best, I'm not suggesting that we be complacent, but I'm saying we do our best today, and tomorrow we try to do a little better. That's a life of spiritual growth. Shall we take any questions here? Any questions? Okay, we'll take a question in back. You'll need the microphone. You'll need the microphone. Thank you.
Swamiji, forgive me for very basic terminology, but from our previous Vedanta session, I understood that we project the events in our life through our thoughts, which are consciousness.
Project the events of our life. What does that mean?
That we project outside whatever is happening through our thoughts.
What does that mean to project what's outside? That I don't understand that. Are you saying you're projecting me?
That's how I understood, that everything is projected through our thoughts, or outside we see it through our thoughts, which are consciousness.
Are you referring to our prior class?
Yeah.
Okay. That's what the Buddhists taught.
Oh. Okay.
That was a Buddhist school of thought, and it's also present in other traditions and called idealism. But that's not at all what Vedanta teaches. You did not create me. I am not a projection of your mind. Go ahead and continue.
Okay. No, if I was thinking if that is true, then through my thoughts I could change what is happening.
It's not true.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if you can change what is happening, then you are God. Pretty good. No, we don't say that at all.
Thank you.
That's a particular Buddhist school of thought, and they don't say that you can. By the way, there is a school. There's another question back here. There's another school of New Age thought that says that you can, through your mind, manifest things in the world. And maybe that's what you're referring to. This is not taught in the Buddhist tradition. It's not taught in the Hindu tradition. In fact, I don't know any traditional religion or spiritual teaching that teaches this. This is kind of, I think, this had its origin in the schools of occultism that came up about 150 years ago. And then it evolved into this New Age idea of manifestation. And it has no, in my opinion, it has no basis in any authentic spiritual or religious tradition. It is, that's enough said. That's another question here, please.
Swamiji, I don't have a question today. But I want to say a few words about the program that happened 2 weeks ago here.
Program?
The puja.
Oh, the anniversary.
The puja
program.
And the homa, beautifully done. And upstairs, the Vasanti ran that program so beautifully.
Absolutely.
And when I heard people talk, I was really heartened. I was touched to see how you have touched people's lives. I mean, you have touched people's lives from the time many were born and grew up. It was so heartening to see that. And I want to say, seeing many people, but I want to name two, Vasanti and Jim.
Yes.
I mean, what they do, that's a testament for Karma Yoga. I mean, they are my teachers too.
Good. Okay, let's take some questions online. Thank you. But by the way, if you if you weren't able to attend that session, it's available online on our YouTube channel, the 25th anniversary celebration. So you can watch. It was indeed a nice program, and I agree. Everything you said was very nice. Okay, this is a tricky question from Thakur, who lives in Pondicherry, South India. And it's a little complicated, so let me paraphrase the best I can. When I've talked about these different traditions of Dvaita, Vishishta Dvaita and Advaita. I've said before that someone who is inclined towards Dvaita, either because of what it teaches or because of their family traditions, then they should follow Dvaita. So there's Madhvacharya and that tradition. Somebody who is inclined towards Vishishta Advaita, either due to the teachings or due to the tradition of Ramanujacharya, if someone is attracted to that, then they should follow that. And I would not push Advaita Vedanta on such a person. I said that Advaita Vedanta is for people who are inclined towards Advaita Vedanta. And there's no problem with that. And Thakur's point, if I understand it correctly, is this acknowledges a kind of sectarianism in Hindu culture. That I'm acknowledging that these are different groups, they have different teachings, and I'm condoning sectarianism. And in this extent I am. In fact, not just these, but how many others. If you look at the Hindu tradition, the variety of teachings and groups, it's just an amazing span. You know, the Arya Samajis are a good example. You know, they reject all the. A fervent Arya Samaji follower of Arya Samaj will reject all the forms of Ishvara that we worship, Sri Krishna and Rama and Shiva and Devi and all of this stuff, and reject all of the pujas we're doing and Murti puja, and they say, you know, God is formless, and you have to worship that God, that formless God, through fire, and only through fire. Should we say, oh, that's very sectarian, we should get rid of them? No. What a wonderful thing that such a wide range of practices and beliefs can be incorporated into one religious tradition called Hinduism. And by the way, what makes them all incorporated is they all have their roots in the Vedas. So that's the common thread towards all these traditions. But now, Thakur's question is, if we condone this kind of sectarianism, then what about other kinds of sectarianism that lead to death and destruction? What's happening in the Middle East right now? And you know, a conflict you might be ignoring is what's going on in Sudan right now. Another civil war which has ethnic bases. In fact, the same bases as the terrible genocide that went on in Rwanda decades ago. It's horrible things due to religious and cultural sectarianism. So, how can you say one kind of sectarianism is good and another kind of sectarianism is bad? It's easy. We judge them by their fruits. What is the result? The result of all these various religious groups in India is excellent. It means that everyone can belong to something, find something that works for them, make that part of their life. It's a wonderful tradition. On the other hand, when there's sectarianism between, say, Jews and Muslims, or between Muslims and Muslims, Shia and Sunni, you know, all of this, you know, what is the outcome of that kind of sectarianism is harmful. So the simple answer is, with regard to everything in life, is we can't have these broad categories, sectarianism, and call it bad. So we have to acknowledge the diversity of life But here's the problem. Maybe we can expand this a little bit. A lot of people are not comfortable with diversity. Allow me, it's related. I think it's kind of like the question hidden in this question. We as human culture are incredibly diverse. Yet, many people are uncomfortable with diversity. So, some followers of a certain religion will be uncomfortable with others. Muslims will be uncomfortable with Hindus. Hindus will be uncomfortable with Muslims. Christians will be uncomfortable with others, etc. That suggests an inability to accept the fact that Ishvara created this world and created all of us in incredibly diverse ways. And I think this has become more of an issue today than it was centuries ago, because we now live in a global culture. Every group interacts with other groups, so it brings about more contrast between different groups. But isn't contrast kind of good? If we were all the same, wouldn't it be boring? If we all looked the same, if we all talked the same, if we all ate the same food, if everything was the same wherever you went, wouldn't it be boring? Tell me, in this country, there's a nice joke they make. In this country, when you go to one town, one city in one state, you go to another city in another state, it looks the same. How boring is that? We like diversity. Diversity is good, diversity is healthy. Why don't we learn to accept and enjoy diversity? And I'm leading up to kind of a tricky subject. Many people are uncomfortable with individual people's diversity. Like when a young person has green hair and 150 piercings of their body, different pieces of metal in different parts of their body. So you get uncomfortable with that. Why? Are they hurting you in any way? What harm are they causing? I think it's, just to be a typical American, I'll say it's cool. It's just fun to see this diversity. Now, on a more serious note, instead of someone with green hair, how about somebody who has an alternate sexuality, someone who is gay, someone who is transgender? Same thing. The person with green hair, how are they hurting you? The person who is gay or transgender, how are they hurting you? This is natural diversity. It's natural that a few young people will be attracted to green hair. It's natural that some human beings will be gay and transgender. This is the way we're created. As human beings, we're created to be diverse. Maybe we can do a little better at accepting that diversity. Okay, let's take a few more questions here. This is a question from Ganesh, who lives in Secunderabad. He asks, with regard to that horrible crash of that plane in India, in Ahmedabad, some 200 people on that plane, and how many families, mostly families of Indian origin, all gone. Individuals of individual, and how many families now are suffering as a result. And Ganesha's question is, how can the relatives of those who died in that crash come out from their deep sorrow and lead a normal life? Is that accident an act of God? How to see such incidents and and still live a normal life. Is it an act of God? This is really a very biblical idea of God, or a very Puranic idea of God. So in the both in the Bible and in the stories we see in the Puranas, God is someone who has a very human-like will, and that is, makes decisions. And some of those decisions seem really arbitrary and strange. And in the Christian tradition, when something happens and somebody says, it's God's will, and then if you ask that person, why would God want such a thing to happen? The usual response is, who can know the mind of God? Is a typical response, which is to justify their perception of God as being very much like a human being who has a fickle will. Sometimes decides like this, sometimes decides like this. So look at this with aircraft. By the way, you already know, we'll come back to this, you already know that the safest way to travel is on an airplane. Look at the statistics. You put yourself at far greater risk every time you get in your car. If you want to be safe, don't drive your car, go by airplane, wherever you go. You'll be safer. I mean, that's just what statistics show. So then how shall we interpret this? God wants aircraft to be perfectly safe, but then once in a while, God changes his mind, like in Ahmedabad. Isn't that kind of a naive way of understanding God? So, and I do understand in the Bible and in the Puranas, there are many stories that lead people to have this kind of concept of God. But I think we need to grow up a little bit and have a more mature idea and understanding of who and what God is. In the Vedantic tradition and in the Bhagavad Gita, Ishvara, the God of the cosmos, is described as karma phala datta, the giver of the fruits of our deeds. Which means God doesn't do what he wants. God gives us the results of actions that we chose. Can I say that again? God doesn't choose. We choose. God gives us the results of deeds that we have chosen, which means Ishvara, understood from this perspective, has no human-like will, doesn't choose to do this or that or the other thing. Now, with that understanding, how do we understand this terrible loss of life in Ahmedabad? There are two ways. First of all, we don't know. I mean, doctrine of karma is not science. We cannot scientifically analyze all of this. So, according to the doctrine of karma, there would be two ways of explaining it, both of which are possible, and we'll see. One way of explaining it is all 200 people on that airplane were, because of their karmas, their lives were supposed to end at that time. They were born with karma to live until this date in 2025. That's possible that 200 people had that in common, that their lives were supposed to end at that point. It's possible, but you'd probably say a little unlikely, and I would agree with that. But still logically possible, but unlikely. What would be more likely is that something happened. There was either a human being made a mistake. Pilots make mistakes. By the way, did you ever make a mistake? Did you ever have an accident in your car where you were at fault? Many people have. Well, pilots are people too. They make mistakes. Of course, there's a whole system to help prevent a disaster when they make a mistake. But human beings make mistakes. So that's one possibility, is pilot error, but people make mistakes. We are created like that. The other possibility, suppose somebody says, suppose it was some part of the plane broke. Okay, also possible. But then who shall we blame? Can we blame the part that broke? So somebody under-designed that part, or somebody failed to maintain the part. So it comes back to mistakes. Either the part was designed by mistake, or it wasn't properly maintained by mistake. People make mistakes, and that's just the way. That's the way life works. And again, this is another place where we have to grow up and just accept these. Everyone wants to assign blame, but who doesn't make a mistake? Okay, just take a couple more questions and we'll wrap up. Next question from, let's see, this question from, this is a question from Prashanto, who lives in Bangladesh. A question about true surrender. In Sanskrit, we use the word prapatti, surrender. How could one truly surrender to God or a higher being? I mean, surrender without any inner resistance, a complete dissolution of ego, as any resistance may cause internal conflict and thus suffering. Well, this is really a topic which deserves some thought. This practice of prapatti, surrender to God, is it is among the highest practices in the sadhana of bhakti. Among all devotional practices, this prapatti is at the highest level. But there's a trick here. Suppose, here's the trick. You cannot practice prapatti. Why? A practice is something you do willfully. Do you see the problem here? A spiritual practice is something you do willfully. Prapatti means you put down your will. So how do you practice? How do you willfully become willful? I'm sorry, I'm getting a little tired here, I think. How do you willfully give up your will? That's a contradiction in terms. So there's something strange. We have other situations like this. Suppose, and just for fun, we do this during our meditation sessions. Suppose I tell you, hey, relax. So you get the point, right? So relaxation is not a matter of doing something. It's a matter of not doing something, correct? That's it. And that's the way to understand prapatti. Surrender is not something you do. And my guru used to give this example, classic example. Someone comes into the temple, lays down this shashtanga of namaskar. They'll stretch themselves out on the ground in front of the altar, and they say, "Oh God, I surrender myself to you utterly." Then they get up, they go home and fight with their spouse. What happened to the surrender? This really shows a common misunderstanding. We confuse ourselves by thinking that surrender is that emotion you feel when you're stretched out on the floor in the temple. You feel something, and it's a wonderful, wonderful feeling, just to feel like, that's it. To have that sense, everything is in God's hands. You can have that sense. If you have some devotion, you go to that wonderful temple, you stretch out in front of the altar, you can have that feeling. Everything is in God's hands. That's a kind of surrender. Everything is in God's hands. But it's a feeling. How long do feelings last? Until this guy got home and fought with his wife. So that suggests that surrender is not merely a feeling. There's feelings associated with surrender, but surrender cannot be dependent on an emotion, because emotions come and go. So then what is surrender? Surrender, especially from a Vedantic standpoint, would be to understand that from a certain perspective, everything truly is in Ishvara's hands. Not as a feeling, but as an understanding. And as an understanding, the difference is emotions change, understanding doesn't. You're understanding that 2 + 2 is 4. How much has that changed since childhood? Hasn't changed. So instead of basing surrender on emotion, it should be based on understanding who is Ishvara and what is your relationship with Ishvara. I'm going to go on further, but I think we'll keep that short and take just a couple of short questions here at the end. Here's a question this is an interesting question from Neil, who lives in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it's fairly long. I'll rephrase. Neil wonders, the wisdom found in the Vedas, actually in the Upanishads, the wisdom of the ancient rishis is held up in such high esteem, then why is it that the teachings of modern saints and sages is not given the same esteem? Why do we hold these ancient rishis up at a higher level than modern rishis? For example, Sri Aurobindo was considered a modern rishi. So why is it that we give extra respect to these ancient rishis and not the same esteem to modern teachers, no matter how inspired they may be? And the reason is not technical or structural like Neil might think, but instead the rishis discovered things for the first time. We moderns are the common expression. We stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. That's true in any field of learning, especially true in science, for example. We stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, which means whatever we can accomplish or say or teach or understand depends on the accumulated wisdom of all those who came before us. Who came before the rishis? And that's why they are given so much esteem. They did not have the benefit of standing on the shoulders of others. So that certainly deserves some of the esteem that they're given. I think this will be a good place to finish the day. Nice questions. We'll take more next week. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschad Dukkha Bhag Bhavit Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti 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 Om. See you next time.